Willow Hastings had always felt more at home behind the counter of Sugar Maple Bakery than anywhere else in Rosehaven. She'd grown up in a quiet household, accustomed to whispered conversations rather than raucous laughter, and as she entered adulthood, baking became her language of choice. Mixing flour and sugar into cookie dough or whipping eggs and cream into airy meringue felt far simpler than trying to hold a conversation in a crowded room. So, when she was finally able to lease the quaint storefront on Primrose Lane, she thought she'd found the perfect spot to settle into a comfortable, unobtrusive rhythm. Most mornings, Willow rose before sunrise and prepared sweet pastries for the early crowd. She became well acquainted with a small but devoted group of customers, early rising teachers, members of the local gardening club, and elderly folks who savoured their morning coffee with a slice of barmbrack or a bite of croissant. The smell of rising dough, the soft hiss of espresso machines, and the warmth of newly lit ovens gave Willow a sense of belonging she'd never quite felt in large social gatherings. Her days were usually predictable, rising at dawn, carefully measuring ingredients, greeting customers with polite smiles, chatting with everyone just enough to be courteous, and then returning late in the afternoon to her small flat above the bakery. If anything unexpected occurred, like someone ordering a dozen custom cakes at once, Willow adapted in quiet efficiency, all while maintaining an intangible barrier that shielded her from the stress. She was comfortable there, stowed away behind the counter and her aprons, rarely venturing beyond her self-declared boundaries. But that routine was about to change. It began on a Wednesday, a quiet one by all accounts, the sort of morning when only the most loyal patrons braved the drizzle to stop by for a scone. The flow of customers had slowed by mid-morning, and Willow was passing time reorganizing her recipe cards. She was old-fashioned in that respect, preferring handwritten notes to digital files. She had them carefully stacked in a wooden box on a shelf behind the counter, each card bearing a meticulously penned sweet or savory recipe. Whenever the bakery was quiet, she would shift them around, reorder them by difficulty, jot down small improvements in the margins, and occasionally discover forgotten treats that she'd neglected to bake for a while. That day she pulled out a cluster of index cards, tied together with a piece of pale pink ribbon. She recalled finding them in a mixing bowl at an estate sale a few months back, a random purchase that felt, at the time, like a small treasure trove. The distressed edges and cursive scrawls gave them a nostalgic charm. She hadn't fully read through them, but she'd gleaned they involved old-fashioned dessert recipes, maybe puddings or cobblers. However, as she untied the bow, a small note fluttered out. Written in the same cursive style, it read, "Apricot crisp. Use caution. This recipe holds secrets. If you're reading this, please remember Elaine." Willow furrowed her brow. At first, she thought it was some playful form of cryptic journaling. Over the years, she had collected plenty of recipes scratched on scraps of paper, many with personal notes like, "For Mary's wedding shower," or Jenny's favorite, "Cut sugar in half." But this note felt oddly urgent, almost like a plea. She examined the recipe further. At first glance, it read like a normal apricot crisp. Fresh apricots, sugar, flour, butter, and a crumble topping. But in the margin, written in the same looping cursive, someone had added, "She never left town. Look at the abandoned greenhouse." Another snippet read, "The library archives hold her photo." Willow's shy nature balked at the idea of investigating something that might be personal or painful. And yet it intrigued her. Who was Elaine? Why would a simple apricot crisp recipe mention a greenhouse and a library archive? She tried to brush it aside, telling herself she had no business rummaging through someone else's secrets. But as the hours ticked by, she found herself drawn back to those words. It was as though the paper itself refused to let her remain indifferent. Torn between curiosity and her natural inclination to remain in her quiet corner, Willow finally decided to at least check if any other recipe cards had similar notes. She carefully flipped through the rest. Some were straightforward recipe instructions: chocolate tarts, lemon squares, a plum upside-down cake. Yet softly penciled in the margins were odd asides. Elaine believed the rumors. Check behind the painting. Chef's best-kept secret turned ominous. Willow shivered at the conspiratorial tone. Written in the same feminine handwriting was a final message on one of the last cards. Trust no one. They all keep silent, but the answers are there if you look. The next day, Willow hovered near the local library entrance, debating whether to go inside. She'd never felt self-conscious in her familiarity with baked goods. Give her an oven and a whisk and she could conquer any recipe. But walking into the library to investigate a cryptic clue scrawled on an apricot crisp card, she feared sounding foolish. Finally, she forced herself through the door, determined to find out if there was indeed some local law behind an Elaine who had once lived in Rosehaven. Mary Nichols, the friendly librarian, greeted her from behind a tall desk. She recognized Willow from her quick weekly stops to pick up the library's tea orders from the bakery, cinnamon buns, fruit pies, or scones. Mary was a bright-eyed woman who spoke in an enthusiastic rush. She adjusted her glasses and smiled warmly. "Willow, you look a little out of your element. Everything all right?" Willow felt her cheeks warm. "I'm looking for information about someone named Elaine. She might have lived here, or maybe she vanished under strange circumstances." Mary's eyes lit with curiosity. "Elaine? That's not much to go on, but the local archives have records of significant events, including missing persons. Should we start there?" The word missing persons sent a chill through Willow. She nodded, following Mary to a section of the library where tall shelves housed leather-bound registers from decades past. Loose newspaper clippings were filed in old boxes, meticulously labeled. They started scanning through older records. Willow tried not to feel awkward, reminding herself she was only following a faint lead in the margins of dusty recipe cards. Mary methodically pointed out sections of the archives, opening thick volumes to reveal meticulously typed local bulletins, births, engagements, retirements, even festival announcements. Occasionally they stumbled upon references to townsfolk who had once gone missing. Most had been found safe, or the records concluded they'd moved away for personal reasons. They were nearly ready to conclude there was no real connection when Mary let out a "But here is something. Elaine Martin. Disappeared in 1978. The article says the official story was that she left early in the morning without telling anyone, but some townspeople believed otherwise. It also mentions a fiancé, Victor Alcott." Mary's brow furrowed as she read further. She was never found. Not a single confirmed sighting. Willow felt a flutter of unease. It was one thing to read tangential references to a disappearance scribbled on a recipe card, but now, seeing an actual report of Elaine Martin going missing made it disturbingly real. Does it say anything about an abandoned greenhouse?" Mary shook her head. "No, not in what I see here. But Alice Burrow, the oldest living resident of Rosehaven, used to keep a greenhouse on the far side of town years ago. I wonder if it's connected." Willow remembered a stretch of overgrown land near a small orchard, the whole area enclosed by rusty gates. She'd seen it from a distance whenever she drove out of town to pick fruit from local farms. Could that be the greenhouse these recipe cards referenced? Mary jotted down the location on a notepad, and Willow took it with her, unsure how to proceed but feeling irresistibly pulled along. As the day wore on, Willow tried to return to the comforting monotony of her bakery routine. She kneaded dough and piped frosting, occasionally pausing to reflect on Elaine Martin. How had she simply vanished? And who wrote these cryptic messages, linking recipes to someone else's tragedy? Before closing the bakery that evening, Willow couldn't resist pulling out the apricot crisp recipe again. She read the words in the margin as though they might have changed since that morning. She never left town. Look at the abandoned greenhouse. The next day, Willow decided to see if she could glean more from the recipe cards themselves. She spread them out on her small dining table above the bakery, brewing herself a cup of chamomile tea to steady her nerves. Each card seemed to hold small, specific references. Certain lines in the instructions might hint at time periods or places, as if the original author had used recipes as coded letters to preserve the memory of Elaine. One note included in a pudding recipe read, "A rose hidden among the vines. That's where the truth lies." This pointed Willow's thoughts back to that vine-covered greenhouse. On Saturday, with the bakery closed for its routine half-day, Willow mustered the courage to drive out to the outskirts of Rosehaven. She couldn't very well break into private property, but the greenhouse she'd spotted had always appeared neglected and unclaimed. The gates loomed rusted, the orchard behind them overgrown. Indeed, the vast structure visible beyond the gates had once been a greenhouse of glass and steel, now covered in climbing vines. Weeds choked the path, and shards of broken glass still dangled precariously from decaying frames. Pushing open the gate, Willow's heart fluttered in her chest. She wasn't the adventurous type, and she felt constant pangs of self-doubt. Exposed to the raw quiet, she heard only the crunch of gravel underfoot and the soft rustle of leaves. At the greenhouse entrance, she carefully tested the door. It sat slightly ajar, squeaking on its hinges like a soft protest at being disturbed. Stepping inside, a wave of stale, humid air washed over her. Broken pots and rusted gardening tools lay strewn across the ground. Rather than pungent floral scents, she smelled only damp earth and the faint musk of rotting wood. She remembered the note. "A rose hidden among the vines. That's where the truth lies." Could there be rose bushes here? Scanning the greenhouse interior, she saw mostly dead vines or shriveled stems, but in one corner, near a shattered window, daylight poured in more strongly, and there she spotted a tangle of once domesticated rose bushes. Their branches had grown wild, snapping through leftover wooden frames. Only a few bedraggled blossoms had managed to appear, mostly dried and wilted. Gingerly, she ducked between thorny canes to see if there was anything behind the growth. Sure enough, beneath the vines, she discovered a small wooden crate. It didn't look particularly old, so someone might have placed it there intentionally. She attempted to pull it out, but the box was wedged between thick roots. Over the course of a few slow minutes, Willow cautiously pried away the vines until she could clench the crate's edges and drag it out. Her heartbeat hammered as she unlatched the lid. Inside were a few letters, a few black and white photos, and a dusty journal tied together with a ribbon. Moving to a clearer patch of ground, she set everything down gently. The photos were old snapshots of a young woman with delicate features and a bright smile. On the back of one, a date was penned, 1978. It had to be Elaine. Next to her in one of the pictures stood a tall, dark-haired man, presumably Victor Alcott. Well, the first few pages were typical notes about gardening, soil acidity, seedling schedules, but as Willow flipped further, the entries took a darker tone. She read references to Elaine confiding in Mei Ling about some dispute with her fiancé, references to suspicion, tears and rumors swirling around the couple. One line read, "Elaine says she doesn't believe the official town story about that orchard sale. She thinks it was laundered money. She's thinking of leaving Victor." Another page had, "If anything happens to Elaine, check the orchard. Don't let them bury this." Willow carefully scanned the rest of the notes. The final entries strongly hinted that Elaine might have stumbled upon shady dealings connected to the orchard land. In one scribbled paragraph, Mei Ling wrote, "Elaine confronted him. She was terrified. I'm telling her to lay low, but she's certain the townspeople need to know the truth." The journal ended abruptly with no explanation of Elaine's fate. Willow set it aside, her mind buzzing. Could Victor Alcott have harmed Elaine because she knew something incriminating about the orchard sale? And who was Mei Ling to both of them? Perhaps the real question was, why did Mei Ling hide all these clues in the margins of recipe cards? Willow considered the possibility, that Mei Ling was the one who wrote those cryptic notes. Maybe she had secreted hints as she fled Rosehaven, or as a backup in case she had to vanish as well. That evening, Willow confided in Mary, the librarian, asking if she'd heard of Mei Ling. Mary's eyes flickered thoughtfully. "I've heard that name before. She was a foreign exchange student who ended up staying here in the 1970s. Quiet woman. I think she worked for Miss Burrow in her greenhouse for a while, learning about horticulture." They conferred in hushed voices, pondering what steps to take. It felt surreal. Willow, the shy baker, found herself plunged into a decades-old mystery that no one had solved. She wondered if she should approach the authorities. But decades had passed. The official stance was that Elaine left the town willingly. Willow couldn't ignore the unsettling possibility that Elaine never left at all. Determined to find closure, Willow checked the orchard land next. Early dawn found her walking along the periphery of the orchard, scanning the terrain for anything unusual. Dew clung to her boots as she circled the property, rising sun igniting the rust-colored leaves for an autumn spectacle. She discovered nothing overt until she returned to the greenhouse area, approaching from the side. Amid an overgrown patch of brambles, she noticed old boards covering what looked like an opening to a root cellar. The boards had rotted away, and curiosity compelled her to peer inside. She didn't enter, but stooping down, she spotted more gardening tools, rotted sacks, and a curious mound of disturbed earth. Her heart thumped. Disturbed earth, if very old, might still indicate that someone had buried something. Goosebumps pricked her arms at the thought that Elaine's disappearance could be explained by something horrifying. Did Mei Ling discover this, realize something terrible had happened, and leave cryptic notes hidden so that someday Elaine's story would be revealed? A gentle voice startled Willow from behind. It was Mary, who'd decided to join Willow for moral support. "You going down there?" Mary asked, though her own voice trembled. "Maybe we should tell the police first." "Right," Willow agreed after a pause that felt like an eternity. A small swirl of relief spun through Willow. Someone shared the burden of her discovery. They contacted the local police, demanding an investigation into the old orchard cellar. At first, the officer on duty sounded skeptical. But after hearing about the old missing person case and the newly uncovered journal, he agreed to send a detective to the site. The orchard was private land, but it had changed hands multiple times over the decades, with no one seemingly maintaining the greenhouse or orchard. Permission to enter was easily granted for the sake of the investigation. When Detective Patrice Miller arrived, her presence brought a calm professionalism to the unsettling task at hand. She oversaw the removal of the boards blocking the cellar. Forensic experts took over, carefully examining the ground. Throughout the process, Willow hovered on the periphery, wringing her hands and wishing she could shrink back to her bakery's comforting walls. After a lengthy search, the experts confirmed they found no remains, at least not immediately. But a series of hidden documents buried in a sealed metal box painted a new chapter in Elaine's story. The documents included what appeared to be official records of orchard transactions, signed not just by Victor Alcott, but also by another prominent Rosehaven politician at the time. Notes attached revealed potential fraud, a funneling of money from unknown sources. Detective Miller guided Willow aside. "It looks like Elaine might have stumbled onto something big fraud, possibly embezzlement. Maybe that was the reason for her disappearance. She discovered evidence, threatened to expose it, and whoever was involved may have pressured her to keep quiet or worse." The detective's expression darkened. "The question is, did she manage to escape with her life? Or did something else happen?" In the following weeks, the orchard documents initiated a renewed investigation into Elaine Martin's disappearance. Town chatter ran high, and Willow found herself at the epicenter, receiving small nods of appreciation from those curious about the outcome. Some townspeople even relished the excitement of an old mystery being revisited, though none of them had lived in Rosehaven long enough to recall Elaine personally. Detective Miller conducted interviews with older residents, including a few who vaguely remembered the day Elaine vanished. Their recollections concurred that Elaine had seemed worried in the days leading to her disappearance. In a surprising twist, the new findings led them to track down Victor Alcott, who was now living in a different state. Decades had passed, but the authorities reopened the cold case, suspecting possible foul play. Rumors flared around his alleged involvement. Willow hoped that if he were responsible, the new investigation would at least bring Elaine justice. Meanwhile, Mary uncovered more of Mei Ling's story by combing through international records. Mei Ling had left Rosehaven in late 1978, soon after Elaine vanished, registering for an overseas flight under her own name. She resurfaced in Hong Kong for a few years and eventually moved to Vancouver. The cryptic recipe cards seemingly had their origin in Rosehaven, but could have been scattered amongst estate sales and flea markets, waiting for someone like Willow to piece them together. It was strange to think that, by chance, Willow had stumbled upon them at a random yard sale. Or maybe, as Willow liked to imagine, fate stepped in to ensure that the truth would not remain buried forever. Willow found a new kind of confidence blossoming within her. Though she still blushed when greeting customers, she discovered that forging connections, asking questions, confiding in Mary was not as frightening as she'd thought. The intangible walls she once hid behind slowly receded. The townspeople rallied around her, especially once news spread of her discovery. They found it both alarming and thrilling that their quiet, unassuming baker had single-handedly sparked a renewed interest in one of Rosehaven's old mysteries. Some teased that she was now a detective in her own right, prompting Willow to color deeply, though she couldn't deny a tiny ripple of pride. One grisly evening, Willow found herself examining the recipe cards one last time. The new sense of closure hovered in the air, though no official conclusion had been reached about Elaine's fate. Word from Detective Miller indicated that old records and new leads might, at least, uncover what truly happened. Willow scanned the last cryptic message. "If you're reading this, please remember Elaine." She felt a pang of melancholy. Elaine's story had gone silent for decades, but now the whole town was buzzing with her name once again. Whether it led to the truth or not, Elaine Martin would be remembered. Willa decided to honor that plea in the only way she knew how. The next morning she baked the apricot crisp from the recipe card exactly as instructed, with fresh apricots, cinnamon, sugar, and the crumbly topping. She set it in the bakery window, adding a small note, "Elaine's apricot crisp in memory of missing residents." People who came by looked at the sign curiously, and Willow found herself sharing the story of Elaine, paraphrased in a gentle tone that neither glamorized nor downplayed the tragedy. Oddly, it comforted Willow to see neighbors pause for a moment and read the note, paying respect with a quiet nod. The crisp sold out quickly, not just for its sweet tang, but for the story behind it. A piece of Elaine's spirit, Willow liked to think, lingered in the fresh, warm aroma. Perhaps Elaine's memory would continue on in every slice. Weeks turned into months, and while the case didn't yield an immediate resolution, Rosehaven's missing person mystery remained an active investigation. The orchard sale scandal was confirmed, and charges were brought against older local politicians who had once colluded for financial gain. This small victory gave some measure of justification for Elaine's initial suspicions. As for her whereabouts, the official search expanded to earlier addresses and potential sightings, all offering slim hope but tangible momentum. In the midst of it, Willow's life changed in other subtler ways. She grew good friends with Mary, forging a bond that extended beyond the usual baker-librarian acquaintance. Sometimes they'd share a pot of tea behind the bakery after closing hours, page through old recipe books, and speculate about the future of the investigation. They even dedicated a small corner of the bakery to curious local history buffs, displaying old newspaper clippings relating to Elaine's disappearance and any new tidbits the detective shared with them. Late one evening, Willow closed up the bakery, softly humming to herself. She peered out at the moonlit streets of Rosehaven, breathing in the gentle hush of the sleepy town. It occurred to her that even though she'd once longed for a life removed from other people's troubles, she'd unexpectedly become central to unraveling a decades-old mystery. There was something comforting about stepping beyond the safety of her routine, where once her confidence had been as shaky as a souffle. Now it felt more firm, like a well-baked brioche. As she climbed the stairs to her flat, she paused at the entry to her room. On the small dining table, a neat stack of recipe cards remained, tied once again by that pale pink ribbon. It represented how an ordinary thing, a battered recipe card, a sweet dessert, could contain profound truths and hidden desperation, bridging the past and present in subtle ways. Willow set a hand gently on the pile, whispering a quiet promise. "I'll do my best to see this through, Elaine." And so, in the tranquil glow of her lamp, Willow finally drifted into a peaceful sleep, comforted by the knowledge that she had broken out of her shell, if only to shine a light where darkness had once reigned. Elaine's story was not forgotten. It baked gently in the hearts of those who savored each crumb of truth, and its warmth, like a fresh batch of apricot crisp, would linger in Rosehaven for months, possibly years to come.